The first question is, when you started working with a knife, how old were you?
8 years old.
Why did you pick up a knife?
My grandfather gave me a knife for my birthday when I was young, and so my brothers and I would go out and do survival type modes and practice in cutting things and trying to hunt with the knife and just try to learn how to survive on our own.
How long have you been teaching working with a knife?
I've been teaching since 1995, so a little over 21 years.
We know that you practice a lot of different martial arts. Can you share about this?
So I teach, the umbrella concept is Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune Do. So Bruce Lee wanted his students to learn how to fight on the ground a little bit. So Bruce Lee started developing his judo skills when he was here in the States. And he has his foundation in Kung Fu, so I also had my study in Kung Fu. And then he wanted to add Savate Boxe Français, French kickboxing, because Bruce Lee said, when we walk in the street, we wear shoes, so I want my students to learn how to fight with shoes on. So he preferred Savate Boxe Français over Muay Thai kickboxing. So I studied both. I studied Muay Thai kickboxing and I studied Savate Boxe Français. And then I also studied Filipino stick and knife fighting because Bruce Lee said all my students need to learn how to use the knife and the stick. And then because my nationality is I'm Native American, so we're indigenous peoples to the Americas. My tribe is the Apache tribe, so my relatives and my families have taught me Apache knife fighting and battle tactics, how we survived for thousands of years.
Did I understand right that you have your own system? Could you mind to share about it?
What I teach, because I've had over 20 instructors my whole life since I was a baby. I teach my students on Mondays. I teach them ground tactics, mostly from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and then on Tuesdays I teach my students Muay Thai kickboxing. Wednesdays I teach them the weapon systems, Filipino stick and knife fighting, and then Thursdays I teach them Savate Boxe Français. Fridays I teach them Kung Fu. So my students can choose to come to 1 day only, or 2 days, or 3 days, or 4 days, or 5 days. But they're not doing Jeet Kune Do unless they're doing all 5 days. And then I do seminars around the world, and I teach Apache knife fighting and battle tactics for more of the advanced students that already have a background in martial arts.
Could you mind to share with us, do you have a certain methodology of preparation a person working with a knife?
So anybody can start right away. Because Bruce Lee taught his students that you have to keep everything simple. If you make things complicated, nobody's going to learn it. Or even if you learn it, when you're in a street fight, nothing's complicated in a street fight. In a street fight, it usually only lasts 30 seconds. So I tell my students, if they're a new student, I say, don't try to learn 20 moves. Don't try to learn everything at once. Just come to class. And when you leave the class, if I taught you 10 things, you're only going to learn one thing. But if you learn one thing when you walk out, then you're 1% better. So I tell all my students, beginner or advanced, you come to my class, you learn a lot of stuff, but you only need to learn one thing that I taught you. Every day we need to make sure that we are 1% better.
Do you have in your system 5 certain principles that underlines in your system?
Yeah, everything's based on 3 main quotes that I tell people. Our philosophy is everything works some of the time, nothing works all of the time. I tell them that you can study any type of martial arts, and there might be a black belt instructor that says this is the best way to block a punch, or they say this is the best technique to do on the ground, or this is the best way to hold a knife. And I said, if an instructor says that, they're a liar, and it's not true, because there's no best anything. There's only what works for that moment in that time. So the more you learn, the better you'll be at having options. But don't have a mindset of thinking only one thing works. So that's the first point. So that's the first one. The second one I tell people is that fair is rare. Because when you watch a fight, people say, oh, that was a good fight, or that was a bad fight. And I tell people in every fight, there is a winner and there's a loser, whether it's a street fight, a kickboxing fight, a karate fight. So if there's always a loser, then there's never a fair fight. And you might be the same weight. Maybe they're both 78 kilograms, or they're the same height, or the same build, or they look the same. But that doesn't mean it's going to be a fair fight. If somebody wins, it was an unfair fight because somebody had a better skill for that fight. So I tell my students that fair is rare, and if it was a fair fight, then you just didn't prepare well enough, because you want to fight and win, fight and win, fight and win. That's an unfair fight, but it's an unfair fight to my advantage because I won. And the third thing I tell people is, when I teach them a technique or a drill or an exercise, it's like a puzzle. A puzzle might have 1,000 pieces to the puzzle. You have to put a puzzle in a certain order to see the picture. So I tell students that you may learn a move and not understand why I taught you it, because you're only looking at one puzzle. You're only looking at a tiny piece of a bigger picture. Each puzzle piece has 4 sides or 3 sides or 2 sides. So that one piece or that one technique that I teach them might work with another technique. And after they learn that technique, another piece of puzzle can be connected. And then after they learn that technique, then another piece of puzzle can be connected. And the more techniques you learn, the more pieces of puzzles you have that start to connect with each other. And then you understand why I'm teaching you something. Because a person who takes only one class for 1 hour and they walk out and say, I didn't learn anything, is closed-minded, because you have to take martial arts for a longer time to understand why we're teaching you certain techniques.
How do you think? Why we have certain situation today that many people really want to start working with a knife?
So you are correct. In the United States, they're a little bit behind in times. I travel around the world, and all the other countries have been doing knife fighting since the beginning of time. But because the United States of America is a very new country, maybe 300 years old, we started where knives weren't used as much for battle tactics. After September 11th, when the Twin Towers in New York blew up, and the news media said that people use knives on the airplane, little box cutters, then the entire martial art community started to learn knife fighting, and they wanted, because everybody in the United States was afraid, oh, that might happen again. Somebody might have a knife and take over a plane. So they were late in understanding how dangerous a knife can be, especially if it's used with the person who knows how to use techniques on a knife. So when I first started doing martial arts, over 20 years ago, there was maybe 1 or 2 people that would advertise about some form of weapons training. That was it. If you picked up a black belt magazine or a martial art magazine of any kind, it was almost always karate or judo or boxing or taekwondo, but you never saw a knife. And then after 2001, September 11th, then the martial art magazines, every other page was somebody teaching knife fighting. So you had years of people not doing any martial arts, and now you have everybody's doing martial arts. The problem with that is that overnight, everybody's a knife expert, and where do they come from? Who did they train with? There is hundreds, if not thousands, of people teaching knife that should not be teaching knife.
In your opinion, why we have a certain situation when today we have a lot of people that really want to teach knife fighting?
Well, the reason why so many martial artists are teaching knife fighting right now is because it's popular, and because they can charge people money and make money off it. So everybody that has a business, they want to be successful with their business. And when only kids are taking martial arts and they're not getting any adults, they want to teach them knife because it's easy to teach somebody how to do a knife technique. And then they think they're learning something and they can charge money for it and they can, make more money off of the people they're charging. But you don't want to teach knife fighting to somebody for money. You want to teach them because you know how to teach them and because it's going to save their life. So you can take Taekwondo and go through your whole life and have a black belt and never know how to street fight. But you're going to be very good in a tournament. In a knife fight, there is no... If you're in a street fight where a knife is involved, you might die or you might kill the other person. And if you know only a couple techniques and the other person isn't afraid of you, you're going to wonder why he took the knife out of your hand. You're going to wonder why you try to do a knife technique that your instructor taught you and you still lost that fight. If you lose a knife fight, you're probably going to be dead. So teachers need to really understand that when you teach knife to people, that you're taking on a huge responsibility and a huge liability because you're giving them information that's supposed to save their life. And if you're not a knife expert that's been trained by a reputable person and you really understand the consequences of a knife fight, then you should not be teaching knife.
Today we have situations like a person working with a knife in the gym for 3-5 years. But when he faced a real situation on the street, he doesn't know what to do and just run away. Why does it happen?
It happens because they're training for showmanship. They're not training for reality. So it means whoever trained them or if they train themselves, what I notice is a lot of martial artists, they know how to do forms or katas. And then all they do is they add a knife and they do the exact same kata. And they want to make it presented so if you do a demonstration, it looks fancy and it looks cool and it looks interesting. And they do these fancy stuff. Some even will do splits or some will do high kicks and knife or some will do knife juggling or knife tossing. And that's fine as long as you understand that that's like for warming up and loosening up and only for show. But there's a whole nother side to it. If you're going to talk about self-defense and reality fighting, you have to really practice hard. You have to practice with the real knife. I see a lot of people that teach knife and they only use a rubber knife or they only use a fake knife. Their whole training. They can train for 3 to 5 years with the knife and they never train with a real knife. I try to get my students to train with a real knife from day one. They can still practice a rubber knife if we're hitting each other, but if we're actually practicing our drills and our technique, I want them to carry a real knife and practice a real knife chopping wood, chopping different types of materials so they understand what it feels like to thrust a knife into an object and different types of objects. And then I always tell them they have to understand that if they're not mentally prepared to kill a person, they will not be successful in their knife training. You have to, first of all, be willing to kill somebody if you want to train with knives. It doesn't mean you're going to. It means that if somebody is threatening you or your loved one, are you willing to kill that person and put a knife in their heart and twist it and hit them in the throat and put a knife in their brain and twist it until blood gushes out and they're threatless on the ground? If they can't visualize that and they can't physically or psychologically, mentally make that connection, then they're not going to be successful at teaching or demonstrating knife fight in a real situation.
Does it important for you which knife to use?
The knife is varied. So I travel the world, and a lot of places it's difficult to just go in an airport and carry a knife with you when you travel. So sometimes I have to travel without a knife. So then I'll land on the airport, and then the first thing I do, I try to buy a knife from that area. So when I lived in the Middle East, I lived in Kuwait, I lived in Iraq, I lived in Afghanistan, I didn't use my knives, I used the knives from the local people, because the knives, like in Afghanistan, in many parts of Afghanistan, they had much larger knives. They had almost like, looks like a small sword or a large dagger. So I bought those because I want to practice on those knives, because I'm probably going to be confronted with somebody that has that type of knife, and I need to know that if they have a long knife, I don't want a short knife. I want a long knife. If I take the knife away from a local person, I'm probably going to take away a local knife, which will be those larger knives. And I need to know how to use it, how to wield it, what its range of motion is, how heavy it is, where the sharp parts of the knives are, or is it all dull? Is it a knife for hitting a person in the head, or is it a knife for stabbing them, or is it a knife for slashing at them? So I have over 125 knives. I've had over 200 knives. Sometimes I break them, sometimes I give them away. But I try to practice with different knives all the time, because you never know when you're in a situation where you have to take away a knife from somebody else, or you can grab something that maybe it's just a pin or a cane, or maybe it's a broom handle or a pool table stick that you can cut up. You want to be able to use all sizes of knives. So there's no one knife I like over another. If I can't find a knife quickly when I land in a country, then I go to the local restaurant and I take a steak knife and I take a butter knife. So at least I'm walking in the streets with two knives. I have a butter knife and I have a steak knife, and I feel more confident that I don't care what knife you give me, the technique is the same. The only thing different is the range of motion and where your sharp part of the blade is. So some blades only slash, some blades only stab, some stab and slash. If I'm in a choice, my choice is to always have a longer knife than the person I'm fighting or my opponent. So you always want a bigger knife than your enemies, typically, and you typically want a knife with edges that all the edges are sharp. So it doesn't matter if I backslash or forward slash or stab, the knife is going to go in.
Do you make a psychological preparation for your students?
I don't do it before, but I do it at the same time. I tell them that if psychologically they can't do it, then they never will do it. A lot of people in the United States of America come back from the war and they have what's called post-traumatic stress disorder, which means that they're having nightmares. It means that they're not able to cope well with society. It means they're socially awkward. So a lot of people come back from the war and they say that something's wrong with their head. And I tell my military people all the time, I say, you should not be sending 18-year-old people to a war zone, first of all. They're not mentally mature. I said they should be at least 21 years old to even be in a battle area, even if they're not fighting, even if they're just, I said, you also need to spend about a year to 2 years training a person in their head and prepare them for the ugliness of war. And there's a famous general in the United States that said, thank God war is ugly, lest we grow too fond of it. So he said it's a good thing that war is so ugly, or else everybody would be going to war every day. The same thing happens. Every day there's murders. Every day there's rapes, there's mugs, there's theft, there's assaults. That happens not just every day, it happens every second. So if somebody, I tell people, just because you live in a rich area, just because nothing's happened to you yet, I said, I guarantee you that something will happen to you, because we live in a society that becomes more and more evil, more and more cruel, more and more dangerous. So every day you're not training is every day your enemy is training, and your enemy is always going to win. Same thing when you go in war. If we go to the ISIS now, the Taliban, and if they're training how to make bombs every single day, and they're teaching their children how to shoot, and they're teaching their people how to sacrifice themselves, then they're going to win a lot of times because they're doing daily preparation. I tell people you have to understand that first you have to know how evil the world is. If you understand how evil the world is, then you understand that you live in that world. And the only way that good is going to overcome evil is if you understand your enemy, you understand what they're capable of doing and how they can hurt you and your family. And then you have to think psychologically, what are you going to do about that? If I tell people, you're never going to win a fight in the street unless you won the fight in your head first. So I tell my students, you have to every day win a fight in your head. So when it happens in the street, you already won it. You already have that confidence and that technique and that skill set to put it together. So I tell my students, start learning both right away. Start learning the psychological training and the knife techniques together right away.
Do you have certain tactics and strategy in your system?
So what I teach is not my system. It's how my tribe, if you're talking about Apache knife fighting and battle tactics, it's tactics that are learned from many different Apache tribes that went into battle and came back and talked about their stories of how they were successful in the battles. So I tell people, you have to think about a street fight like a war. Your enemy is going to kill you. Your first choice is a lot of times evasion. The best way to get out of a fight is to not be there. So I tell people the first thing you need to learn is be aware. Look around your surroundings. If the surroundings don't feel good inside, then you need to listen to your heart, listen to your mind. If your body is uneased, then don't be there. Leave that area because the environment around you is telling you this is a dangerous place. So leave that area. So that's the first strategy. The second strategy is if you can't leave the area, you need to either get your weapon ready or be ready to pull out your knife, or be ready. If you don't have your knife, then you need to look around and say, what can I grab? Can I grab that computer monitor and throw it into his head and smash his head in if he comes closer? Is there a baseball bat? Is there a trash can that I can grab and I can shove my way out of there? Is there a tool in my car that I can grab and use as a weapon? So that's the second thing you have to learn. So first, evade the situation. Second, look around for anything you can grab that you can use as a weapon.
Do you have a certain criteria according to which you can understand who is the real master and who is not?
I would say that if they're doing complicated moves, they may be a master of that martial art. So I'll use Filipino martial art, for example. I like the martial art. I studied it for years. I like to teach it. But there's some complicated moves in there that I can't teach a person in one day or 1 hour. If we're talking about street self-defense for the knife, then I teach them the Apache knife fighting and battle tactics because that's stuff that came from the battlefield specifically. If you're watching a person, somebody who says he's a master in knife and he's demonstrating very fancy stuff and very complicated moves that you can't learn in 1 hour, because you can watch it, you could say, wow, that looks great, but I couldn't learn that in 1 hour. Maybe after a month of training, I could learn it. So as long as the teacher says this is a complicated move to help your mobility, to help your reflexes, and that's why I'm doing this drill, then that's okay. But if he's saying this complicated move is what I teach all my students to fight in the street, then it's not a good instructor because he's not simplifying things. A street fight is very simple. You're either getting stabbed or you're being stabbed. You're either evading a stab or you're blocking a stab. So a great instructor with the weapons, especially the knife, is somebody that teaches you and teaches his students simple blocks, simple evasions, simple strikes, stuff that isn't going to be overcomplicated for an 85-year-old person to do. If you have to be very physical and you have to be an athlete to do the knife, and that's the only way you learn, then it's not a good instructor. An athletic person is going to be great for kickboxing, maybe good for jiu-jitsu, but you can have a person that has medical conditions, it's very weak, very old, maybe a female that doesn't have a lot of strength, And if they have a good teaching technique, they can still fight a person who is 6 foot tall or maybe 2 or 3 people if they understand fundamental quick motions with the knife.
In social network, you have a name like a snake broker. Could you mind to share about it?
So that is my real name. It is a very unusual name. Maybe in the United States of America, maybe 3 people that have Snake as the first name. And then Blocker is my family name, my surname. Snake means for my tribe because I'm indigenous to the United States. The Apaches are great warriors, and they're still alive today. A lot of people see movies about Apaches fighting the white person when they came to America. So that's how most people know about our culture. But our culture is still alive. There are still Apaches that do the songs, that do the dance, that do the traditional training from the old times. The language is very complicated. The name Snake means that if you watch a snake in the wild and if you observe it for a long time, as it gets older and matures, it'll shed its skin. So it takes its skin and it pulls its skin off. A snake in the wild never looks back at the skin. Once it sheds its skin, it keeps moving forward. After it sheds its skin, the snake is more beautiful, it is stronger, it is larger, and it had shed its old lessons, its old mistakes, it had matured to the next stage in life. So too my name is the same. So I was named Snake because I'm supposed to understand and always remember that I am to go through life, I am to learn. There will be mistakes in the learning process. Sometimes you fail, sometimes you get back up, but you always move forward. And then after you learn a lot, you shed that skin of knowledge and you use it moving forward. You don't look back and dwell on your mistakes. You don't say, I should have done that. I wish I would have did this. No, you say, I'm done with that stage of my life. I want to move forward. I want to keep learning new stuff. I want to grow stronger. I want to look more beautiful. I want to keep advancing in life and never looking back at my past mistakes.
How do you think? Does a knife have some future in 21st century?
It does. Right now in the United States of America, like I'll go back 20 years ago. Like I said before, the knife wasn't introduced and taught in the martial art community as a whole. Now everybody's teaching knife. If you're a Taekwondo instructor, you're teaching knife. If you're a Kendo instructor, you're teaching knife. If you're a kickboxing instructor, you're teaching knife. So I would say the vast majority of martial artists are now including some form of knife into their training. But you have to be careful, like I said earlier, if you train the wrong way, that's not good. Then when you come to me, I have to tell you to forget everything you learned, and we have to start over with our understanding, and we have to do that psychological training. In the old days, it used to be mostly they would have gun shows where you would go to a big convention and there'd be lots of guns and a few knives. Now everything is gun and knife show. So all over the United States, if they're selling guns, they're selling knives. So there's a much higher amount of acceptance in the United States of America for knives. There was a saying by I believe it was Albert Einstein, and he says he was asked during World War II or after World War II. He says, "What do you think the future battles will be?" And he says that I could tell you that World War III will be a lot like World War II, but World War IV will be sticks and knives and stones. So we rely, all of the countries, Russia, China, United States of America, we rely too much on technology. We rely on satellites. We rely on internet. We rely on all these electrical engineering. Even if you fly a plane, it's all automated. It's all electrical. If World War III happens and the satellites are taken out and the fiber optic cables are broke, or if there's a natural disaster like an earthquake, a tornado, something that takes out the world's electronic system, nobody's going to fight with airplanes because they won't be available. The electronics will not work. You can't go from point A to point B without electrical systems. So the future of the world, if we lose our technology advancements, it's going to go back to fighting each other with a sword, fighting each other with a knife, a stick. You're not going to have people having the availability of even guns and ammunition, or if they have guns, they don't have the ammunition if they stop producing it or they make it illegal. So everybody, the criminals, have to fight some way. They have to rob you and steal and rape. So they're going to go back to using more knives. So knives are here to stay. Since the beginning of time, thousands and thousands of years ago, people have used knives. And they're still around today, so they're never going to go away.
What is a knife for you?
A knife for me is a multi-purpose survival tool. That's all it is. It's a tool that you want to utilize every day, or at least have it available for you every day. So if I'm eating lunch, a knife is something to cut my fruit, cut my vegetables, cut my steak. If I'm out in the wilderness, a knife is used to cut branches so I can build shelter, or to dig a hole so I can put my food and create a fireplace. A knife can be striking a rock so I could create a spark to start a fire. A knife can be something that if I'm in the street and somebody, say 3 or 4 people, are up to no good and they're bad people, sometimes I can just show my knife and then they'll walk away. You don't have to know how to do a knife. Many times people will walk away if they see you have a knife because they don't want to get cut. Even if they have a knife, they still don't want to get cut, because I tell people, my students all the time, if it's a knife fight, there's going to be blood. If it's a boxing match, you're going to get hit in the face, even if you're Muhammad Ali. You're going to get hurt. So you have to know what it feels like and understand psychologically that you're going to get cut and they're going to get cut, and hopefully you don't get cut in the wrong spots. But a knife to me is also something that you can have as a security blanket. Money doesn't do you any good if your life is threatened. It doesn't matter if you're rich. If they want to hurt you, they're going to hurt you. A knife is something that will help eliminate that possibility or lower that possibility of getting hurt. And a knife by itself is a beautiful tool. There's some knives I have that have a lot of art to them. So I like just to look at them, and it's like looking at a piece of art, and it makes you feel relaxed and tranquil. A knife is also a exercise tool. Just like I grab a kettlebell and I do kettlebell workouts, I can grab a knife and do a series of exercises like Tai Chi to just loosen up my shoulders, loosen up my body, but I have an extra tool to grip onto so I can practice my grip, practice staying relaxed, and practice holding my hands in a certain position. So a knife can be anything.
What would you recommend to the people that just decided to start working with a knife?
I would say pursue it. Everybody in the world should learn how to use a knife and how to respect a knife, even as a child. So a lot of people won't teach children knife. But if you don't teach your children how to use a knife, they'll go to school and they'll be bullied or assaulted or killed by another kid the same age that has a knife. That's bad. So we want to make sure that everybody learns how to use a knife. Thousands of years ago, children hunted, children fought, children went to battle. Now it's politically incorrect to teach children how to defend themselves in that way with a weapon. Some people get mad when you teach a child how to shoot a gun. But if you teach a child respect, and these are the options, and this is what happens, and this is the real world, if they have a respect for it first, then you can teach them. That's okay. Everybody needs to learn it. If you're older now, it's never too late. You didn't do it before, that's okay. Today's a new day. Start today. If you don't use a knife, if you don't have a knife, if you don't want to learn a knife, then you better be living in an area where there's no people around. You know, so if you're going to live in any area where there's people around, or even wild animals around, you need to first own a knife. A lot of people, they come to my class and they start training, and I say, bring your knife to class tomorrow. And they say, I don't have a knife. I said, well, why are you learning how to knife fight to defend yourself if you don't even carry a knife, or have one in your car, or have one in your house, or have something that looks like a knife? It might be a screwdriver. It might be a hammer. That's okay. But you need to have something that is like a blade that can be used as a weapon, as a knife can. So everybody, first of all, no matter how old they are, if they have a sound mind and if they're good people, they need to learn how to use the knife. They should start with looking for an instructor that has a good reputation, that is a good person, that isn't a criminal, that isn't a bad person, that isn't somebody that is a martial artist that is all about the show and about himself. You need to find somebody that knows how to break down moves simple. And if you take a class, you can always take a class and see if you like the person. If you like the person and you walked out and you didn't learn anything, or it was too hard, then don't go back. If you like the person and you leave and you said, hey, I learned one thing that will help me, then keep going back.